grey with irregular flecks of white on the underside. All known manatees have a low reproductive rate, making them especially vulnerable to the effects of hunting and habitat loss. Will stories of a dwarf manatee hold water? Or are they just another myth of the region? Mark left the village with more than just stories. Once again, the kind people of the Aripuanã let him keep the leftovers of their meal. Later, Mark is able to compare a skull of a common Amazonian manatee with his new treasure, the skull and jawbone of what he believes is a dwarf manatee. Although similar in appearance, there are finer details that tell them apart.
So the most striking differences are the long elongated snout of the common one, and the small one has a very short trunk. Another striking difference is the brain case size. It's very narrow and in the common manatee, and then the small dwarf manatee has a relative much larger brain size.
Francis guides Mark up the Aripuanã River to the creek where the manatee was killed, hoping that there might be more in the same area. They spot one of the Amazon's oldest inhabitants. A bird whose ancestors rubbed shoulders with the dinosaurs. The Hoatzin. Hoatzins are known locally as the smelly pheasant for the musky odor they produce. But these birds are a biological wonder, a visual aid to the process of evolution. The chicks still have prehistoric features, including claws on their wings, just like Archaeopteryx, considered widely to be the first bird. They use the claws to scramble through the branches in the flooded forest. The claws disappear before adulthood. Hoatzins are unique birds, with complex stomachs to digest tough vegetation. Special bacteria needed for this harsh diet is passed to the chicks from their parents. The Hoatzin is a natural wonder and another threatened species in need of protection. Francis directs Mark into the Arawatsino, a tributary some 40 kilometers long. Overgrown and shallow, this flooded forest is clearly not suitable for bigger common manatees. But it could probably accommodate a smaller species. It is not an easy place to look. As a primatologist, Mark never stops scouring the treetops for monkeys. He spots one of the smaller residents of the canopy, a squirrel monkey.
I learned from the monkeys how to survive in the forest and what you can eat and what you can't eat by observing them. They taught me how to make a living without killing any animal.
Mark has become a vegetarian, mimicking the monkeys' fruity diets. Charismatic squirrel monkeys are among the monkey man's favorite subjects. The creek narrows with fallen trees forming barricades, but there is clearly lots of leaf matter. Could this be the food of the dwarf manatee? Dead wood lies across their path, but Mark won't allow such minor obstacles to get in his way. Not when the river ahead may hold such a huge secret. As the search for a new species continues, Mark hears a song that is music to his ears, the duet of titty monkeys. These monkeys also mean a lot to Mark. They were one of his earliest discoveries. He described them back in 2002. He named them Prince Bernhard titty monkeys in honor of his supporter, the Dutch Prince Bernhard. Much of their lives remain a mystery. They've never been filmed in the wild before now. The end of the road, but at least Mark has samples of the dwarf manatee's food.
This is about the far as we can get after all these logs over the river. But I'm happy to have seen the habitat of the dwarf manatee, because the local people in Francis, they say that the dwarf manatee is feeding mainly on these two species of Eliocharis grass.
If this is true, it would make the dwarf manatee differ in its feeding behavior from its larger cousin. The Amazon manatee feeds at the surface on floating plants. It seems that the new species may be a bottom feeder. Mark will have to try again in the dry season. Once home, the Calibea gets another visit. The unusual watchman announces their arrival. River traders bring in supplies of eggs and flour. Mark always exchanges news with these people. As the traders spend their whole time traveling up and down the river, they often have useful information and current news. September sees a change in the weather. The huge floodwaters finally subside, revealing the forest floor once more. The Calibea's progress has slowed to negotiate newly emerging sandbanks. Mark uses the downtime to revisit a childhood fantasy, the Lost World. Not so fanciful now as Mark searches for missing giants himself. Calibea's captain weaves her slowly through treacherous sandbanks, some of which he can barely see below the surface. At the height of the dry season, the river reveals its skeleton, with sandbanks sticking out like ribs from the murk. Ground-nesting birds, such as nightjars, crouch on their nests to prevent the sun hard-boiling their eggs. People lived here as far back as the Stone Age, and now the newly exposed rocks tell an ancient story.
Here the Stone Age Indians clearly depicted a manatee. Here's the tail of the manatee, and here's the head. And I consider this a good omen in the search for the dwarf manatee. Maybe they depicted the dwarf manatee. I hope so. This is one of the nicest engravings here. It's of a dolphin. It's a long elongated snout and a high forehead.
Unlike other dolphins, pink river dolphins or botos can turn their necks because the vertebrae have not fused. When the forest floods, botos twist through the tree trunks. They have long tooth-lined beaks and in the murky waters of the Amazon have lost the need for sight. Their tiny eyes give them a prehistoric appearance. The dolphins use sophisticated internal sonar to avoid collision in the gloom. Sonar doesn't prevent collisions above the surface, though. The Calibeia has run aground for the 4th time. It takes a little patience and some careful navigating to get them back on track. Finally, the ship reaches the Arauazino Creek. Home, Mark believes, to the dwarf manatee. It snakes back into the heart of the mysterious rainforest. Could secret creatures live here, hidden from human eyes? After months underwater, the sandy riverbanks are rich in minerals from decaying vegetation. Butterflies flock to lick up the nutritious cocktail. The water is refreshing to drink as well, despite its off-putting colour. Mark is anxious to press on in his search for the dwarf manatee. A find this size could draw international attention to the region, perhaps creating pressure to give it official protection, saving not only a new species, but protecting the habitat of the monkeys that Mark so loves. With that fresh inspiration, he presses on in his search. Francis joins him again, along with his brother Ephraim. Logs and branches clog up the creek. Progress upstream is frustratingly slow. It's a bit of a helter-skelter ride, and they keep the chainsaw close at hand. This is dangerous work. Francis spots one of the logs they cut just a few months ago, in the rainy season. It shows just how far the water level has dropped, some 4 or 5 meters. The speedboat's engine shatters the peace of the rainforest, disturbing the inhabitants. They spot an empty den, but the owners are nearby. The 3 men stop to get a closer look. Giant otters, the largest members of the ferret family, agile fish eaters at nearly 2 meters long. Mark decides to take a dip. Giant otters live in large family troops and call loudly to each other through the forest. Once a common sight in the Amazon basin, hunting for pelts has greatly reduced their numbers. The otters seem reluctant to approach the bather, so Mark takes a look at their home instead. Otters don't always dig their own dens. Sometimes they find a natural cavity, such as this one, in the roots of a tangled tree. Butterflies have gathered on the den floor, perhaps absorbing minerals from the otter's urine or oil from their last fishy meal. Other traces of the feast remain. Large scales, perhaps from the jarraky fish, one of their favorite fish prey. It's a welcome interlude and a reminder of the rare and important species of the region, and the